Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Sally Bundock with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. The new British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak aims to bring factions together as he names his cabinet. Ukraine urges its citizens abroad not to return until the spring to ease pressure on damaged energy systems. Sportswear company Adidas cuts ties with the rapper Ye, calling his anti-Semitic postings on social media hateful and dangerous. And knocking out the hits, Tyson Fury hopes his new single will raise awareness about mental health. A very warm welcome to the programme. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will host his first cabinet meeting later today after Tuesday's dramatic reshuffle. On taking office, Mr Sunak vowed to fix what he called the mistakes of Liz Truss's leadership before resurrecting the ministerial careers of Suella Braverman, Dominic Raab and Michael Gove. He'll also face a stern test in Parliament later as he takes on the opposition party leader Sir Keir Starmer in Prime Minister's Questions, as our political correspondent Jonathan Blake reports.
On day one as Prime Minister, among Rishi Sunak's first tasks in office, phone calls with other world leaders. Mr Sunak spoke last night to US President Joe Biden and President Zelensky of Ukraine. There were calls too with the First Minister of Scotland, which Nicola Sturgeon described as constructive, and the Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford, who said the UK's urgent challenges were discussed. Earlier, Rishi Sunak said he'd been elected partly to fix the mistakes made by his predecessor Liz Truss. He promised hope, but warned there'd be difficult decisions ahead.
I will place economic stability and confidence at the heart of this government's agenda. This will mean difficult decisions to come. Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis. The aftermath of COVID still lingers. Putin's war in Ukraine has destabilized energy markets and supply chains the world over.
There's a familiar look to Mr Sunak's top team. Most of the faces around the cabinet table served under Liz Truss or Boris Johnson. Jeremy Hunt remains as Chancellor, the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly stays in post and Ben Wallace continues as Defence Secretary. Suella Braverman's return as Home Secretary less than a week after she resigned over a security breach drew immediate secretary. It's all about continuity, says Downing Street. Opposition parties argue more of the same is not good.
We've had 12 years now of Conservative failure and we're now on to our third Conservative Prime Minister in 3 months. They don't have a mandate to govern. Rishi Sunak himself has no mandate.
The real problem we have, this isn't one Prime Minister changing during the lifetime of a Parliament. This is the third Prime Minister in the space of 2 months.
Rishi Sunak has asked today for the British people to trust him. Yet the Conservatives won't put their trust in the British people by giving them a say in a general election. People are worried sick out there. There are millions of struggling families and pensioners. They need more help.
The first big test for Rishi Sunak's premiership will come when his Chancellor makes a statement on tax and spending plans scheduled for Monday, but there's talk of a delay. Before that, this lunchtime, Rishi Sunak's first Prime Minister's Questions on his first full day in office. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
Well, you could argue that financial markets to a degree cheered the news that he was appointed as Prime Minister. The pound went up quite significantly in value and also the interest rate on government debt came down. We'll be looking at the reaction, what business leaders want, and also the likes of Grant Shapps now as Business Secretary of State, Jeremy Hunt, of course, remaining as Chancellor. All that to come later in our business coverage. Now let's get some of the day's other news. 5 people, including at least 3 Palestinian gunmen, have been killed in an Israeli military raid against a militant group in the occupied West Bank. It follows the killing of an Israeli soldier earlier this month. Palestinians have called for a day of resistance against Israeli forces. Thousands of protesters in Sudan have been marking the first anniversary of a military takeover. Security forces used tear gas and stun grenades to prevent demonstrators from reaching the presidential palace in the capital, Khartoum. Talks aimed at ending Ethiopia's civil war are underway in South Africa. The head of the African Union says he's encouraged by early signs of a commitment to peace by the government delegation and rival Tigray forces. The fighting has left many thousands of people dead and created a humanitarian crisis. NASA has unveiled a prototype lunar rover with living space for astronauts. It's part of the agency's plans to send astronauts to the moon for the first time in half a century under its Artemis project. The rover can crawl across rocks, drive in all directions, and comes complete with its own toilet. Now, let's bring you the latest on Ukraine. It has urged its citizens who are abroad not to return until the spring to help ease the pressure on the severely damaged energy system. Russian missile and drone attacks on power plants and other infrastructure have reportedly destroyed a third of the country's energy sector. Well, we can now speak to Yuri Sak, an advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Defence, joining us live from the capital, Kyiv. Thank you for being on the programme. So what is the situation when it comes to energy and the provision that you've got at the moment?
Good morning. Like you said correctly in your report, about 40% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been damaged or partly destroyed by the Iranian drones that were fired at Ukraine and continued to be fired at Ukraine by Russia. Drones, missiles. So, of course, this puts a strain on the energy infrastructure. As a result, some parts of Ukraine are experiencing regular power cuts. Because the government, while it is trying to fix these problems and to restore the electricity in these areas, at the same time, there is, of course, pressure on power plants, on electricity grids, and that's why we need to save up. And that's why that statement was issued earlier with the appeal to Ukrainians, who are at the moment abroad, if they can stay over for the winter in those countries where they are now, it would be logical for them to stay there because, the fewer people are here in Ukraine, the less is the pressure on the power grids.
And when we talk about the number of refugees, there's estimated to be something like 7.7 million Ukraine refugees staying in other European countries at the moment. That is an awful lot of refugees. Do you know how many were intending to come back to Ukraine?
It is difficult to conduct any exact polling or to count everybody who was willing to return. But of course, we have seen during the summer period, we have seen a lot of people returning, particularly Kyiv. Hundreds of thousands have returned. And right now, with this current security situation, with the continuing missile terror and the threat of drone attacks, and we know that the aggressor is negotiating to buy more drones from Iran. So, of course, the situation is such that it is not conducive to the return of Ukrainians who are currently as refugees abroad.
How concerned are you about the use of a so-called dirty bomb? Are you preparing for that possibility?
We are dealing with a very deranged and very dangerous enemy. We've seen that Russia is capable of committing all kinds of atrocities in the past. So while we hope that this doesn't happen, we have to be prepared. And of course, all the statements by Russia that they're making about the risk of Ukraine using such a dirty bomb, they're nonsensical. Nobody believes them. Every leader of every civilized country has already expressed their outrage at these statements, and everybody understands that very often when Russia makes these kind of statements, they're preparing for some provocation. And our energy agency, government energy agency, Energoatom, just yesterday issued a statement that the risk is high because during the past few days, some unusual activities have been noticed at, for example, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the second largest power plant, which is now occupied by the aggressor. So we are concerned, of course, and we are appealing to the international community to do everything possible to stop this from happening.
OK, Yuri Sak, thank you for talking to us on BBC News.
Thank you.
Now let's bring you news about the clothing giant Adidas. It's ended its partnership with the musician Ye, formerly known as Kanye West. Adidas says it doesn't tolerate hate speech. Hours later, Gap said it would also remove his Yeezy products from its stores. It comes after Ye posted anti-Semitic comments on his Twitter account. He's also been removed from Twitter. Peter Bowes has more from Los Angeles.
He had what every marketer dreams of, a larger-than-life personality, adoring fans and global stardom, a music industry extrovert and a maverick. Money-spinning tie-ups with household names from the world of fashion were lucrative. But the commercial prowess of Kanye West is imploding. After posting anti-Semitic remarks, Ye's been banned from Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. The luxury fashion house Balenciaga dropped the rapper. Gap is removing Yeezy products from its stores, and the talent agency CAA has stopped working with him. Ye's relationship with Adidas has been fractious for some time. In a now deleted Instagram post, he'd accused the German company of stealing his designs. And when he wore a White Lives Matter jacket at a Paris fashion show earlier this month, the firm said it was going to review their relationship. Now it's called time on their multi-year deal, saying Adidas does not tolerate anti-Semitism and any other sort of hate speech. Ye's comments and actions were unacceptable, hateful and dangerous. The company said ending its multi-year partnership would have a short-term negative impact of up to $250 million on its net income this year.
There's a feeling that Adidas should have acted a lot quicker than it did. And now it's going to have to, make amends with the Jewish community and show them that, it's sorry as a brand.
There's been no response from Ye to the move by Adidas, but he's facing a huge reputational and financial hit. Forbes magazine says he's lost his status as a billionaire and is now worth only $400 million. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
And do stay with us here on BBC News. Still to come. He's going to become a pop star. Why Tyson Fury is hoping to be a knockout in the charts.
Indira Gandhi, ruler of the world's largest democracy, died today. Only yesterday she'd spoken of dying in the service of her country and said, "I would be proud of it. Every drop of my blood will contribute to the growth of this nation."
After 46 years of unhappiness, these two countries have concluded a chapter of history.
No more suspicion, no more fear, no more uncertainty of what each day might bring.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
Boy, enjoying the show is right. This is beautiful.
A milestone in human history. Born today, this girl in India is the 7 billionth person on the planet.
You're with BBC News, the top stories. Britain's new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak starts to shape his new cabinet. He says his aim is to bring factions together. Ukraine urges its citizens abroad not to return until the spring to ease pressure on damaged energy systems. Today marks 40 days since the death of the young Iranian woman Mahsa Amini. That's a number that holds great significance in Iran and marks the end of the mourning period. Her death while in custody of Iran's morality police sparked nationwide protests that are now in their 6th week. Well, let's talk this through with our news reporter Azadeh Mashiri. Azadeh, just talk us through why the government in particular is very nervous about today.
Well, Iranian authorities tend to be pretty concerned when it comes to funerals or any sort of mourning ceremony, and that's because these tend to turn into protests, especially in the last few weeks. You've had anti-government slogans chanted, you've had protesters and female protesters remove their hijabs. And so when it comes to this 40-day period, which it marks the 40 days since Mahsa Amini died, the very same woman who died in custody and triggered these whole nationwide protests, they're going to be particularly concerned. And so they've taken certain measures to try and mitigate what they worry could be an uptick in protests. Now, one of those things is Iranian state TV broadcast a statement by Mahsa Amini's family saying that they weren't going to mark this occasion, which is extremely unusual, and that they just didn't want any trouble. Now, of course, rights groups and other activists have warned that this was likely made under duress. And in other regions in Iran, like Kurdistan, that has seen a significant number of protests, governments have shut down schools. Schools, of course, are where a lot of students have protested, though they say it's because of an apparent outbreak in influenza. That's obviously not clear, but either way, there have been calls for further protests today.
Now, as we've said, it's 6 weeks that these protests have been ongoing since the death of Mahsa Amini. So where are they at in terms of the impact they're having?
Well, they haven't lost any momentum. They're still going on this week. There have been more protests, especially in universities. There have been some in a couple of universities in Tehran as well as Ahvaz. But the crackdown has continued as well. There's one instance in particular where there was a school for girls in Tehran, Sadr school, and security strip searched these schoolgirls because they wanted to make sure they weren't bringing in any mobile devices that could have allowed them to broadcast any scenes of protest. And in fact, it led to some of the security staff beating the children when they were refusing to be strip searched. At least those are the reports that we're getting in. And given all this, given this 40-day mark, it's worth looking at what the crackdown has looked like so far. Now, in terms of the figures, at least 234 people have been killed during these protests. That's according to the Oslo-based NGO Iran Human Rights, who've been tracking this from the start. That includes 29 children, according to the NGO. 12,500 people have been arrested, many of them held in the infamous Evin prison. There is also a crackdown going on against the press, with 44 journalists detained, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. And of course, there is still censorship going on, with the government blocking all VPNs and international messaging services. Now, the reason that the government is taking all of these measures and coming down so hard on the protesters is because this is a movement they haven't been able to contain, and it's a movement that represents one of the biggest threats the Islamic Republic has ever faced.
OK, Azadeh, thank you. And we'll keep a close eye on how today unfolds, the very latest on that. Now, let's bring you a harrowing story about a very young girl. She was just 12 years old. She was raped and murdered at her apartment complex in Paris. And she has since then become a cause of célèbre for France's anti-immigration parties, because this followed after an Algerian woman was actually charged with the offences. The 24-year-old woman, known as Dabia B, allegedly carried out the attack after ignoring an order to leave France this year, triggering questions over the country's handling of immigration. Here's our Paris correspondent, Lucy Williamson.
The softest of targets. Lola, 12 years old, raped and tortured, her body left in a case outside her family home. This week she was laid to rest in a small white coffin, a personal tragedy turned political. The woman charged with her murder, an Algerian who overstayed her visa for France and ignored an order to leave. In Lola's old neighborhood, residents described a mood of fear.
I'm traumatized, the neighborhood is traumatized, all of France is traumatized. I think the whole world is.
The messages here outside Lola's home in Paris are to the little girl from the neighborhood who loved gymnastics. But that personal story has been overtaken by fierce political debate. Lola's vulnerability seized upon by anti-immigrant politicians who say France itself needs protecting. In Parliament, the far-right leader Marine Le Pen said the government was to blame. The suspect should never have been on French territory, she said.
Se servir du cercueil.
France's Justice Minister said right-wing MPs were using a 12-year-old's coffin as a political stepping stone. Lola's family asked that their daughter's name and image not be used for political ends, but she's become the poster child for anti-immigration rallies across France. Banners in her name read, "The state killed me."
This is a very potent cocktail for the far right to use the fact that the perpetrator, or the elected perpetrator, is a woman from Algeria. The crime is totally horrendous. The victim is a young girl, and the perpetrator is maybe insane. So many people think, why are we compelled to have such people on French soil?
That message taps at a nation's shock and anger. At a memorial for Lola in her grandparents' village, there were questions beneath the tears.
I think we have to respect the will of the parents who don't want any political exploitation. But we also have to act. Things really need to change. I'm very tolerant, very open to the world, but there are things that we cannot tolerate.
Far-right politicians have long argued that curbs on immigration would protect France's economy or culture. How much more potent to suggest they might have protected one little girl. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Now let's bring you all the latest sports news.
Hello, I'm Mark Edwards with your sport. We start with football on a night when 5 more teams qualified for the knockout stage of the European Champions League. There's still one match day to go, but those heading through to the last 16 include the holders Real Madrid, even though they suffered their first defeat of the season in all competitions after losing 3-2 to RB Leipzig in Germany. Kylian Mbappe and Lionel Messi scored 2 goals as Paris Saint-Germain thrashed Maccabi Haifa 7-2. Juventus missed out on reaching the knockout stage for the first time since 2014 after losing 4-3 at Benfica, the Portuguese side joining PSG in the last 16. And Chelsea beat RB Salzburg 2-1 to end their 40-match unbeaten home record. Chelsea group winners, Graham Potter still undefeated as Blues boss.
It's not easy to create chances against this team because defensively they're so intense and aggressive. But I thought we did. I thought we created some good chances from good play. You know, we've had a lot of games and a little bit of disruption in terms of some really key players missing. But credit to the boys, they've responded really well, picked up points in the Premier League, and obviously to go through like we have in the Champions League it's a fantastic effort from everybody. So we'll take steps. It's not going to be a straight road, unfortunately. But we'll take steps. Tonight was one, I think.
Cricket, and there are 2 more games at the Men's T20 World Cup on Wednesday. England versus Ireland is followed by New Zealand against Afghanistan. On Tuesday, the host nation Australia bounced back from Saturday's defeat against New Zealand with a 7-wicket victory over Sri Lanka. Marcus Stoinis, the star of the show, with an unbeaten half-century. He smashed 59 of just 18 balls as Australia chased down their target of 158 with 21 balls to spare.
Well, let's stay with sport because Tyson Fury, one of the biggest names in boxing, is 2-time world heavyweight champion and a fan favourite. But he's also a bit of a crooner. Famously, after his big fights, he would serenade the crowd. Well, he's releasing his first single, hoping to raise awareness about mental health, as Tim Allman reports.
Inside the ring, the Gypsy King is a force to be reckoned with. Powerful, remorseless, a formidable opponent. But away from boxing, Tyson Fury is a more sensitive soul. Not content with being a world champion, he now wants to be a pugilist pop star. Releasing a cover version of Neil Diamond's Sweet Caroline for a very important cause.
I've been very vocal about the mental health struggle, and it's been widely printed from highs and lows, ups and downs. So I've tried my utmost best to keep talking about it as much as I can and keep trying to smash the stigma, I suppose.
First released in 1969, Sweet Caroline has already been covered by some of the greats: Elvis Presley, Andy Williams and David Hasselhoff. The song already has strong ties to sport. Boston Red Sox fans sing it at every game at Fenway Park. England's footballers took it up as an anthem on their way to the final of last year's European Championships. As for Tyson Fury, flying the flag for mental health is one thing, but that's not his only motivation.
I always wanted to be a singer, even though I'm quite at it. But like my wife keeps saying, fake it till you make it. So I'm the next Tom Jones, I believe.
This unique musical rendition is due to be released next month, all proceeds going to charity. No doubt the Gypsy King is hoping it'll be a knockout. Tim Allman, BBC News.
Now I challenge you not to be singing that song today. I'll be back with the business stories next.
Hello, we're going to see out the rest of the month with temperatures above where we might expect them to be for this time of year by day and by night. Staying unsettled, a windier day again for Wednesday. The chance of catching a shower after some early wet weather clears away. The bulk of the wet weather from this area of low pressure coming through overnight and into the first part of Wednesday morning. Before then, sunshine and the chance of catching a blustery shower. And if anything, temperatures edge up a few degrees in the next couple of days. We are drawing the air up into the UK from a long way south of us. And these are the starting temperatures for Wednesday morning, for the most part in double figures. Now, we have got some rain into Scotland that will push into the Northern Isles, clearing Shetland in the afternoon. A band of showers across all parts following on behind. But look at the timeline. This is lunchtime and then into the afternoon. It is sunny spells. Showers mainly in Scotland and Northern Ireland, some heavy and thundery, a few pushing into Wales and western parts of England. But further east you are, the bulk of the afternoon could well be dry. These are average wind speeds. Gusts are going to be higher. Coastal gales through the Irish Sea. Some gusts in the Western Isles to around 50 miles an hour or so. Out of that breeze and in the sunshine, there'll be some warmth around in the afternoon in parts of eastern and southeast England, not just Wednesday, but for the rest of the week. A few spots will get to 20, if not a bit higher than that. As we go on through Wednesday night and into Thursday morning, we'll see cloud and rain gathering and starting to push up across parts of England and Wales. Another weather front may just bring some rain into the far west of Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland early on Thursday, with a very mild start. So cloud and outbreaks of rain to clear away from England and Wales on Thursday and a brighter, drier afternoon following. Some of that rain pushing through Northern Ireland into Scotland when we keep a lot of cloud around into the afternoon. And again, these temperatures are well above the long-term average. Now, looking at the big picture going into Friday, low pressure, weather fronts again, with a lot of the wet weather, though, again going through overnight and into Friday morning, clearing from Scotland and northern England, for example, quite quickly on Friday morning. Maybe just a weaker area of showers for East Anglia and the southeast, not much in the way of rainfall here. Then it's a case of sunny spells, the chance of a shower, though many places with a dry afternoon, before some rain edges back towards southern areas later on Friday. For the weekend, staying unsettled, yes. It does look like a lot of the wet weather, though, will move through overnight Saturday and into Sunday morning before clearing to sunny spells and showers.
Morning. Come and have a seat. Now, of course, I'm not going to go easy on you. There are some really big questions we've got to try and get answers to this morning. But I'll be fair, and we just want to hear what you've got to say. So, shall we get on with it?
We're rolling.
Here we go. Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg. Sundays at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines, Europe, the Taliban, Ukraine. Symbolically, it's very important. Let's take this stage by stage. Here's the BBC Stephen McDonald in Beijing. The West has stepped up sanctions against Russia. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. But in practical terms, what does that mean? Next, we have to step back and let's just remind ourselves this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ross Atkins. Outside Source, Monday to Thursday at 7 on the BBC News Channel.
He wants tomorrow's news today. She's broadening her horizons. He's growing his knowledge. They're searching for expert opinions. She's dying for a lively discussion. He's taking stock of the situation. She wants to dive deeper. They just need a conversation starter. Everyone's news all in one place. The Papers, tonight at 10:30 and 11:30 on the BBC News Channel.
Hello again, you're with BBC News. I'm Sally Bundock. Time now for the top business stories. Markets cheer the appointment of Rishi Sunak, but now the hard work begins. We assess his new team and what it means for the UK economy. Shares in Alphabet, the owner of Google, sink on the news. Ad spending is slipping in a sign times are tough in e-commerce. And old is the new, how the big fashion retailers are jumping on the pre-owned bandwagon. So let's now get down to business, and we start in the UK, where the new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has moved into number 10 and spent most of his first day appointing senior members of the government. So on arriving in Downing Street, he said the UK was facing a profound economic crisis and made a point of saying that he'd repair the damage caused by some of the policies of his predecessor, Liz Truss.
I will place economic stability and confidence at the heart of this government's agenda. This will mean difficult decisions to come.
He named his new cabinet. There are a lot of changes, but Jeremy Hunt stays in the key post of Chancellor of the Exchequer. He was appointed just a few weeks ago after the failed mini-budget by the previous Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. On Monday, Jeremy Hunt is due to deliver a much-anticipated statement on the government's tax and spending plans, along with analysis from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Let's discuss this with Melanie Baker, Senior UK Economist at Royal London Asset Management. Good morning, Melanie. Now, there are some rumours that this fiscal event on the 31st of October could be delayed. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's a particular cause for concern if we're talking a delay of a few weeks. I think, letting Chancellor Minister Sunak, giving them time to come up with a fuller set of fiscal policies, having those discussions with advisors, with experts, allowing the OBR more time to digest all that and coming up with a full set of economic and fiscal forecasts. That's something potentially to be welcomed, rather than have something rushed through. So I don't think that's a particular cause for concern. It's a little bit awkward in terms of the timing of the next monetary policy meeting. So we have the Bank of England on November the 4th. I'm sure ideally they'd love a full set of fiscal forecasts and policies at that time, but having a well thought out and explored set of policies is important at this stage.
How do you think these two men will get on? Because, of course, Rishi Sunak was Chancellor and he was applauded to a great degree for how he handled the UK economy during the global pandemic. Jeremy Hunt now has that job. Do you think they're going to clash, or do you think they will get on?
I think they've both said all the right things in a sense. And they've both done the right things so far. I think that if you look at the measures from Chancellor Hunt that have already been announced, those have been broadly welcomed by the market. We have had all those tax U-turns. I think with Sunak having kept Hunt in place, it's a signal that we're not going to get a whole other set of fiscal changes. They seem to be on the same wavelength, hopefully, in that sense. And if you think about the kind of things Sunak was saying over the summer, the criticisms that were made of Truss's economic policies, I think that there's no reason to think at this stage that they won't just be able to get on with the job.
Now, the former Bank of England governor, talking to the BBC, Mervyn King, said that the level of austerity we're all going to experience now is going to be much worse than the post-financial crisis of 2008. What are you expecting in that fiscal event? What will the detail be when we do get it?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd expect the measures really announced by Chancellor Hunt already to stay in place clearly, but beyond that, there's this sort of fiscal hole has opened up, which reflects the state of the economy. In terms of scale, the numbers banded around on that one seem to be sort of 30 to 40 billion. So that is a lot of potentially extra revenue that needs to be raised or spending that needs to be cut. But there are a lot of moving parts to that number. And one helpful thing clearly is that with Hunt and Sunak in place, and those U-turn measures already made, we have seen the cost of government borrowing already fall. And that's helpful in terms of lowering the size of that fiscal hole for the government. And of course, we may see Sunak making some different choices here. Perhaps we'll see returns to debates around windfall taxation, for example. Perhaps he may reinstate the health and social care levy that will lower the fiscal hole and mean less in the way, at least, of spending cuts. But it's clear this is not going to be a particularly pleasant set of fiscal forecasts or policies.
OK, Melanie Baker, we appreciate your analysis. Thank you. Now, tech stocks have been hit hard by the latest earnings news from two giants, Alphabet and Microsoft. Shares in the parent company of Google dropped over 5% in after-hours trading after it reported disappointing results. The company that also owns YouTube said ad sales rose just 6% in the 3 months to September to $69 billion as firms cut their advertising budgets amidst the economic slowdown. It marked the US firm's weakest quarterly growth in nearly a decade outside of the start of the pandemic. Well, let's talk to Liam Patterson, Chief Executive of Bidnamic, which is a Google shopping specialist. Liam, it's good to talk to you. What did you make of the news from Alphabet? Analysts are worried.
Yeah, I think it really highlighted that no company is immune. Quite often, Google is seen as this, immune business. They've got so many different components to their company. They're really a barometer of e-commerce, but of digital marketing and ad spending in general. So I think it was a bit of a shock. It certainly performed below analysts' expectations. And there's kind of two key components that I read from it. One is the pullback in YouTube advertising. So that was expected to grow significantly, but only actually grew at around 4.2%. So it was quite a big fall to where analysts were expecting that to be. And YouTube is a very important component to that business. So that was a real shock to the company to lose out on that ad growth and at the level they would expect. And then there's the core business, which is their Google search. So people going to Google, as me and you might do, searching for products or for services, and that's their search business. And that continued to grow, which was reassuring, but again at a much lower rate at 4.2% rather than the 8% that analysts expected. And that creates challenges for advertisers in two ways. Firstly, it means that it's a real challenge of consumers going there who are being hit by inflation, who have maybe fears of recession looming soon, and are pulling back on their ad spending. But there is still growth in the search piece of the business, so there is still a real opportunity for retailers to connect and find those customers, but it's growing at a lower rate than previously.
And that's expected, isn't it? I mean, we can't expect Google, even as a company as mighty as that and as large as that and pervasive, to defy gravity when we're seeing a slowdown in most economies around the world.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. So, maybe that's how we would read it, but markets are always pacing in that growth, and it did come in below analysts' expectations. So that's why we've seen the drop in the share price and the pullback. But yeah, they're just not immune to rising inflation, to all the challenges that many businesses are facing with rising costs as a result of that. Consumers feeling the pinch on their wallets, and also the fears around future recession, maybe imminent in the UK, maybe coming in the US, which is Google's core business sector in the US. So I think that whilst we might see it coming a little bit, the markets haven't seen it coming here, and particularly the scare around the drop in YouTube, which has been their fastest growing part of the business from a small base, but really growing rapidly, and to see that turn into a decline has been quite a shock for the company.
OK, Liam, thank you. Liam Patterson there from Bidnamic. Well, let's bring you some other news and tell you about Microsoft, because it added to the gloom for the tech sector on Tuesday as it warned of a marked slowdown in its cloud computing business in the coming months. Its shares were down over 6% in after-hours trade, despite its results beating analysts' expectations. Microsoft said first quarter revenues came in at over $50 billion. Products such as Outlook and Teams have made the company essential to businesses continuing to use flexible work models. Adidas says it's ending its partnership with the US rapper and fashion designer Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, over his anti-Semitic remarks. The German sportswear giant says the severance would take place with immediate effect. It's not the only brand to do so. The Gap ended its partnership with Ye last month and is now pulling all remaining Yeezy Gap products from its stores and online. In the US, one new business model hopes to change people's lives for the better. Founded by immigrant women, Brightly, a cleaning company, has become the country's first cooperative franchise. Its growing success aims to put workers' needs at the forefront of the industry, as Samir Hussain reports.
Since coming to the United States from Mexico 25 years ago, Julieta Aquino has been a cleaner, one of the lowest paid, least secure jobs in the economy.
Yo trabajaba con un patrón, ¿verdad?
I had a boss, so there were schedules. There was someone who ordered you around. And I'm a single mom. I had to work for my children. Then later, my life changed.
Entonces, después cambió mi vida.
What changed is that after decades of being employed by businesses, she became a business owner herself. Now Julieta sets her own wages and working conditions and earns more than twice what she used to. Now, what makes this unique is that her company is actually an immigrant-run cooperative called Brightly, part of a franchise of cleaning companies.
Nuestro trabajo.
They value our work. It's difficult, but we get rewarded.
Julieta and her co-owners meet regularly. Each member has an equal say in decision-making. The profits are shared equally, too. As a franchise, Brightly shares its name, brand, marketing materials, and payment systems with other cleaners who want to own their own business. Now, this branch is just one of 5 in New York City, with another coming in Philadelphia. The success of Brightly could be a model for other cooperatives in other industries. Altogether, the Brightly companies make up $1 million business. By sharing resources, these kinds of franchises could actually help some of the most vulnerable in the economy get a more secure foothold in America.
It's actually tragic. If you look in this avenue, all of these businesses are owned and operated by immigrant business owners. This kind of collective ownership does something new in capitalism. It provides an opportunity for capitalism to become democratic and humane in a way that it isn't in so many other exploitative industries.
Brightly has done more for Julieta than just better working conditions.
Cuando me di cuenta que yo puedo estar en finanzas,
I realized that I can be in finance, I can be in marketing, I can lead. It's not impossible. It's something I can also do. So I feel very proud.
Entonces me siento muy orgullosa.
More worker-owned businesses, pooling resources so that each one benefits. Small cleaning companies in New York might be showing America a new model for capitalism. Samir Hussain, BBC News, New York.
And do stay with us here on BBC News, still to come. Old is the new, how the big fashion retailers are jumping on the pre-owned bandwagon.
Indira Gandhi, ruler of the world's largest democracy, died today. Only yesterday she'd spoken of dying in the service of her country and said, "I would be proud of it. Every drop of my blood will contribute to the growth of this nation."
After 46 years of unhappiness, these two countries have concluded a chapter of history.
No more suspicion, no more fear, no more uncertainty of what each day might bring.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
Boy, enjoying the show is right. This is beautiful.
A milestone in human history. Born today, this girl in India is the 7 billionth person on the planet.
This is BBC News, the top stories. Britain's new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak starts to shape his new cabinet. He says his aim is to bring factions together. Ukraine urges its citizens abroad not to return until the spring to ease pressure on damaged energy systems. Down under inflation has jumped, with the annual rate in Australia now at 7.3%. That's the highest level they've seen there since December 1990. And guess what? Gas prices is one of the reasons why cost of living is going up and up. It's one of the big drivers of the change. It comes a day after the government released its latest budget, the first budget under the leadership of Albanese. Well, Joao da Silva is following this for us in our Asia Business Hub. Joao, tell us more.
Well, Sally, like people elsewhere, Australians are feeling the pinch from soaring prices. That consumer price index for the third quarter coming in well above estimates and really accelerating at a pace not seen in more than 3 decades. And like you said, it's really higher costs with basic goods such as petrol, food and construction materials that's driving inflation higher. And that means everyone is being affected, from consumers to businesses, and also, of course, the government's spending plans. The Labour government of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese unveiled its first budget earlier this week, and the analysts we've been talking to say that it's a lot more cautious than the budgets of his predecessor.
This is a very different budget from what we saw back in March, when we did see the outgoing Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, offering some relief to households in the form of petrol excise tax being demolished temporarily, and also tax cuts to lower middle income earners. This time around, we haven't seen that. Instead, there has been a focus on 5 key areas. These are things like childcare, extended parental leave, cheaper medicines, housing, as well as trying to stimulate wage growth. But overall, it does seem to be a much more responsible budget, probably something that the Australian government has learned from the lessons in the UK over the last month as well.
Well, it's not just the government's spending plans that are being affected by higher inflation. Earlier this month, the Reserve Bank of Australia announced a lower than expected rate hike of 25 basis points. That followed 4 moves of 50 basis points earlier in the year. The Reserve Bank of Australia really explaining that it just wanted to take a pause and gauge the impact that the drastic tightening was having on consumer spending. Well, with this latest inflation data, analysts in this region are saying that the Reserve Bank of Australia might have to pursue a more aggressive tightening policy once again if it wants to bring those soaring prices under control.
OK, Joao, good to see you. Thank you for that. Well, worldwide, higher energy prices is one of the key things fueling inflation, and governments around the world have come up with various plans to try and help households and businesses. Now the World Bank is warning governments to be very careful, as it's too expensive to try and help everyone. Instead, the World Bank chief, David Malpass, talking to the BBC, has advised governments they need to be smarter and target help to those who need it most. Well, let's discuss this with Janet Moy, Head of Market Analysis, RBC Brewin Dolphin. Janet, good to see you. I mean, this is one of the plans that Liz Truss's government with Kwasi Kwarteng announced very quickly, wasn't it? That will help households for 2 years, capping their energy bills. That's since been reversed. It's just there for 6 months, but still it's help for everyone, which is what the World Bank is saying is not such a good idea.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. Yes, helping everyone is not sustainable, because in an ideal world, we would love to have a money printing machine, and then there's no inflation. But obviously, after the COVID pandemic, we have inflation after billions of money spent on helping a lot of people. And the COVID experience is that it wasn't targeted enough, and there wasn't enough test to make sure that we're helping the most vulnerable in society. And the energy bill support that we have currently in place is again not very targeted, and it is going to cost estimated of 30 billion. So it is a huge amount of money, and we are borrowing to finance the support as well. And the borrowing cost is currently close to 4% if the UK government wants to borrow for 10 years. So this is a significant cost for the government in the longer term, and it's just very fiscally unsustainable.
Yeah, so it's extremely costly. Looking at the numbers, that's partly why financial markets reacted so badly to the mini budget of the former Chancellor. But also, David Malpass is pointing out it will just fuel inflation further, possibly.
Yeah, absolutely. We already have high inflation because of the war in Ukraine and many other aspects that is impacts from the pandemic, for example, supply chain problem, etc. And if we do help everybody, then I think the inflation problem can get worse, because the problem with the energy price cap we have in the UK is that it is capping the per unit price of energy, and it potentially cannot incentivize people to cut back on the energy usage, which is actually very important. So ultimately, people would end up having a bit more disposable income compared to if there's no energy support. So in the medium term, it can indeed fuel inflation at a time when inflation is already very high. So this is quite unsustainable. And this is very costly, unsustainable, and it's also not quite fair as well, because energy bill as a percentage of total income is much higher for lower income households compared with people who are more well off. So the measures could indeed be more targeted in nature, but the implementation side of it could be a bit more difficult, and government have to spend a lot of money to test people and logistically to implement the plans. So it is tough anyway.
OK, Janet, thank you. Good to see you. Have a good day. We'll see you again soon. Now let's talk about the second-hand fashion industry. It's been around for decades, primarily in the form of charity shops or thrift shops and vintage stores. However, the advent of online resale platforms is turning second-hand fashion into a mainstream market now, and some big high street brands are climbing on board, such as Zara. They're taking resale seriously and starting their own pre-owned services. To tell us what's going on, I'm joined by Kate Hardcastle, consumer expert, Insight with Passion. Kate, good to see you again. So this is great news, isn't it, for the climate-conscious consumer? So talk us through what Zara's doing.
Well, they've announced that it's going to be an interesting initiative launching in the UK. They've had donation bins across stores in Europe associated with the British Red Cross since 2016. But this is quite a different concept. This is encouraging consumers to get engaged with the idea of reselling, repairing or donating garments from the Zara collection. Now, absolutely, this is working with the zeitgeist from consumers, particularly Generation Z, who are looking more into this as an option. There's definitely a commerciality to it, and the money will always breed the excitement and interest from those consumers, because there's the opportunity to resell, which means they can put some money back into the bank and then look to repurchase. And obviously, when brands get hold of this, and we've heard many organisations like this do it, from Shein, who've got a resale platform for customers, as well as organisations like John Lewis, it allows that brand to be part of the conversation and part of the fact that this is actually happening through resale websites anyway.
And it's, as you say, it's got real momentum, hasn't it? For example, I've got teenagers at home and they're all reselling. I mean, they're buying on apps such as Depop and Vinted, and buying, wearing and reselling, which is much better for the planet, isn't it? Because actually the fashion industry is a huge contributor, isn't it, to CO2 emissions?
Absolutely. The fashion industry is one of the most challenging when it comes to our environment and sustainability challenges. 1.5 trillion tonnes of water used as estimate in that industry every year. So it really has to do its bit. And you're completely right. A lot of this has been driven by the younger generation. If you like, the stigma of the idea of wearing clothes that have had a different life, a different story before you own it, is now gone. And that's great news, because actually those consumers are going to be leading the way. They're going to be a huge market. I think a couple of things have happened here. I think because there's a commercial reality to it, those consumers want to get involved and engage with it, but they're overfaced with the amount of choice. And this actually provides more of a curated collection, also allows them to feel a bit more unique. They'll have a story to tell because they're wearing something that might not be on every website and clothes store. But as with most things, there isn't a case where this is just a win-win-win. There's criticism, because as you can imagine, when brands like Zara do this, Zara is still responsible for hundreds of brand new fashion lines into stores each week. And one has to understand that this has to be a two-way development. Yes, it's great to engage with the e-commerce market, but what we also want to see is these organisations doing the right thing in sustainability in the clothes that they produce for sale the first time around too.
Absolutely. Kate, thank you. Good to see you. Have a good day. Kate Hardcastle there, a consumer expert, insight with passion. So you're up to date on all things news, business and sport. Thank you for your company. You too have a good day and we'll see you soon.
Hello, we're going to see out the rest of the month with temperatures above where we might expect them to.